There is a moment John Travolta has lived 3 times, standing in a room that has gone very quiet, holding the hand of someone he loves, feeling the exact second the warmth begins to leave. Most people spend their lives hoping they will never know that feeling once. John Travolta has known it at 23, at 55, and at 57. He has also known the roar of a stadium crowd chanting his name. He has signed contracts worth $20 million. He has watched his own face stare back at him from the covers of magazines in every language on earth. He has danced in front of cameras while the whole world watched and believed, for a few perfect minutes, that nothing could ever go wrong. Both of these things are true. The applause and the silence, the spotlight and the dark room, the boy who made the world dance and the man who kept returning to say goodbye. This is not a story about fame. Fame is just the backdrop. This is a story about what endures when everything else falls away, about what a person becomes when loss is not the exception in their life, but the recurring lesson. John Travolta is 70 years old, and he is still here, still moving. That alone is worth understanding. John Joseph Travolta was born on February 18, 1954, in Englewood, New Jersey, the youngest of 6 children in a house where money was never a given, and dreams required justification. His father, Salvatore, had once played semi-professional football. By the time John arrived, those days were gone. Salvatore came home each evening from the tire shop with hands that smelled of rubber and a face that said the day had taken more than it gave. He was a good man carrying a weight his youngest son would spend years trying to understand. His mother, Helen, was something else entirely. She had sung professionally with the Sunshine Sisters, her voice traveling through radio waves into living rooms across America. Then she married, had children, and traded the microphone for a high school drama classroom. She taught teenagers who rarely grasped what they were being given. But she never stopped believing that performance was a form of power, that the stage did not care about your zip code or your family's bank balance. She believed this most fiercely about John. She watched him move through a room differently than other children, watched how he absorbed music, how his body responded to rhythm before his mind had time to think. She told him things that settled into him like roots. That being poor was a circumstance, that being ordinary was a choice, that talent, real talent, was the one thing no one could take from you if you protected it. He was 16 when he made his decision. He stood up from his desk at Dwight Morrow High School during his junior year, walked out the front door, and did not go back. No diploma, no safety net, just a conviction that the conventional path was not his path, and that waiting would cost him more than leaving. His parents did not stop him. His mother looked at him and said something he would carry for the rest of his life. If this is what you want, then give it everything. No halfway, no backup plan. You either make it, or you become a warning to others. He crossed the Hudson River into New York City with almost no money and an absolute refusal to fail. New York in the early 1970s did not welcome him warmly. He slept on floors in apartments that belonged to other struggling performers. He auditioned constantly, learning to read the faces of casting directors in the 3 seconds before they looked back down at their papers. He landed a touring production of Grease, not as Danny, the lead, but as Duty, a supporting character who existed largely to fill the background. He made his Broadway debut in Over Here, a show that closed quickly and left almost no trace. He distributed flyers on frozen streets. He carried equipment for productions that paid in exposure rather than income. He sang for rooms that were half empty, for audiences whose attention drifted before he reached the second verse. Each rejection landed. He felt every one of them. But he had made a promise to himself, and underneath that promise was the image of his mother's face when she told him there was no halfway. Stopping meant proving her wrong. That was the one outcome he could not accept. Then 1975 arrived and changed the arithmetic entirely. Welcome Back, Cotter premiered on television. John Travolta played Vinnie Barbarino, charming, slightly ridiculous, magnetically watchable. America decided immediately that it loved him. His face appeared on magazine covers. Teenage girls wrote his name on their notebooks. He released a single, Let Her In, that climbed to number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. At 21 years old, for the first time in his life, John Travolta did not have to worry about where the next meal was coming from. He had made it, or so he thought. What he did not yet understand was that making it is never the end of the story. It is only the moment the real story begins. In 1976, John Travolta walked onto the set of a television movie called The Boy in the Plastic Bubble and met the woman who would change what he understood about love. Her name was Diana Hyland. She was 41 years old. Accomplished, measured, with the kind of presence that fills a room without announcing itself. She played his mother in the film. He was 22, wrapped in the sudden warmth of his first real fame, still learning what it meant to be recognized in public. The age gap was 18 years. The outside world noticed. They did not particularly care. I have never been more in love with anyone in my life, Travolta would say years later. From the first week on set, we talked constantly. About everything. After a month, it became something else entirely. They were inseparable in the way that only happens when two people recognize something in each other that they have not found anywhere else. They escaped to Palm Springs, to Big Bear, to New York. Diana's young son from a previous relationship came with them. John chose a house for the two of them. They planned to move in together the moment he finished filming his next project. That project was Saturday Night Fever. What John did not know, what Diana had not yet told him, was that she had undergone a mastectomy 2 years before they met. The cancer had not stayed contained. It had continued its quiet work through her body while she laughed with him and made plans and touched his face. She did not know the end was certain until 2 weeks before it arrived. He was in New York, filming, becoming, without fully realizing it, the biggest star on the planet. They spoke every evening by phone. He listened to her voice and tracked its changes the way you track weather when you are afraid of what is coming. It was getting quieter, more careful. He could hear something in it she was not saying directly. When it became clear there was no more time, he left the set and flew back to Los Angeles. They walked together in the garden outside her home. It was the kind of March afternoon that cannot decide if it is still winter. She stopped at certain flowers and looked at them for longer than usual. He did not rush her. He understood, without either of them speaking it, that she was memorizing things, that she was saying goodbye to the world in the particular way of someone who knows this is their last conversation with it. He held her hand. On March 27, 1977, Diana Hyland died. John Travolta was 23 years old. I felt the breath go out of her, he said, many years later, in the quiet tone of someone who has carried a specific weight for so long it has become part of their posture. One moment, she was there. And then she was not. At her memorial, he wore a white suit. It was the one they had chosen together for a trip to Rio de Janeiro they had planned and would never take. He went back to work because there was nothing else to do. Saturday Night Fever opened that December. The image of John Travolta in a white polyester suit, one arm raised toward the ceiling of a Brooklyn disco, became the defining photograph of an entire decade. The Bee Gees soundtrack sold in numbers that still seem impossible. He received his first Academy Award nomination. The world watched him dance and assumed he was happy. He was performing happiness. There is a difference, and he knew it acutely. Grief does not disappear because the lights are bright and the crowd is loud. It waits. It learns your schedule. It finds you in the elevator, in the parking lot, in the hotel room at 2 in the morning when the applause has finally gone quiet. Then Grease arrived in 1978 and grossed nearly $400 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing live-action movie musical ever made. Then Urban Cowboy in 1980. John Travolta was everywhere, on every screen, in every conversation. He was also, beneath all of it, a 23-year-old who had held someone he loved while she died, and had never been given a moment to fully reckon with that. The world owed him nothing for that. The world rarely keeps that kind of account. But the debt existed, and debts like that collect interest in the quiet years. Fame has a specific kind of cruelty that poverty does not. When you are poor and unknown, failure is invisible. It happens in private, in rooms no one is watching, and the world does not register it. But when you are John Travolta in 1981, when your face has been on the cover of Time magazine, when you have been the subject of think pieces about what you represent for an entire generation, failure happens in public. It is documented. It is discussed. It becomes the story people tell about you. The first signs were easy to dismiss. Moment by moment in 1978 had disappointed. Critics were unkind. Audiences stayed home. But Saturday Night Fever and Grease were still fresh in the culture, and one misfire felt like a stumble rather than a pattern. He kept moving. Then the pattern became undeniable. Two of a Kind in 1983 arrived, and left without ceremony. Staying Alive the same year, a sequel to the film that had made him a legend, felt like a faded copy of something that had once been vivid and alive. Perfect in 1985 gave critics the opportunity they had been waiting for, and they used it without restraint. What the box office numbers could not fully capture was the quieter, more damaging loss happening simultaneously. The roles that went elsewhere. There is a particular kind of pain in watching someone else inhabit the life that almost belonged to you. American Gigolo went to Richard Gere. An Officer and a Gentleman went to Richard Gere. Splash went to Tom Hanks. Each of these films did not merely succeed. They built careers, cemented legacies, turned actors into icons of their era. Travolta had been offered each of them. He had said no for reasons that made sense at the time, in the moment, with the information he had. That is the thing about the wrong choice. It rarely announces itself as such. By the late 1980s, the phone had gone nearly silent. Not entirely. There were still projects. The experts in 1989 came and went so quietly that most people who saw his name attached to it assumed it was a different person. He was not blacklisted. He was something more unsettling than that. He was simply no longer the answer when producers asked themselves who they needed for a film. His name no longer arrived at the top of the list. Then it stopped appearing on the list at all. He was 35 years old. He had been a star at 21 and a fading memory by 30. The industry that had once built its conversations around him had simply redirected its attention, the way a crowd moves when the music changes, not out of malice, but out of habit. What do you do with that? You cannot argue with indifference. You cannot fight an absence. The rejection letters of his early New York years had been brutal but navigable. They were doors closing, and a closed door at least confirms the wall is there. This was different. This was the wall itself, disappearing. Being rendered irrelevant is its own category of loss, distinct from failure, quieter, and in some ways harder to metabolize. He kept working. He took what came. Look Who's Talking in 1989, a romantic comedy built around the conceit of a narrating baby, arrived with no particular expectations and earned nearly $300 million worldwide. It was not a resurrection. It was a lifeline, and he recognized the difference. He made the sequels. He stayed visible. He waited. Underneath the waiting, something else was happening. In 1991, John Travolta married actress Kelly Preston. It was not the cautious union of two people protecting themselves from further damage. It was, by every account, a genuine and deliberate choice. Two people who had found in each other something worth the risk of loving again. They had been through enough separately to understand what they were building together, and they built it carefully, with intention, in the full knowledge that nothing is guaranteed. Their first child, Jet, was born in 1992. For a man who had spent much of the previous decade watching his professional life contract, fatherhood arrived as an uncomplicated expansion, something that required nothing from him except presence. He showed up. He was there. Whatever Hollywood thought of him in those years, at home he was simply a father. And that was enough. The industry's silence continued, but the silence at home was a different kind entirely. The particular quiet of a house where someone small is sleeping, where the stakes have been rearranged into something more legible than fame. He did not know that one phone call was coming that would rewrite the rest of the story. He did not know that Quentin Tarantino had a script and a character, and a very specific idea about who should play him. Quentin Tarantino was not supposed to want John Travolta. In 1993, Tarantino was the most talked-about young director in Hollywood. Reservoir Dogs had announced him as something genuinely new. A filmmaker who understood that dialogue could be as violent as a gunshot. That tension could live entirely in a conversation. Studios were watching him carefully. Actors were reading his scripts and clearing their schedules. He wanted Travolta. Not as a concession, not as a nostalgia casting choice designed to generate headlines. He wanted him because he had watched Saturday Night Fever and Grease dozens of times and believed, with the particular certainty of someone who understands performance at a molecular level, that the thing that had made Travolta magnetic in 1977 had not gone anywhere. It had simply been placed inside films that did not know what to do with it. The character was Vincent Vega, a hitman, unhurried, philosophical in the way of someone who has stopped being surprised by the world, prone to long conversations about foot massages and the metric system in European McDonald's. A man who moved through extreme situations with the calm of someone running slightly behind on errands. It was nothing Travolta had ever played. Tarantino sent the script. Travolta read it. Then he did something that tells you everything about where he was professionally in 1993. He hesitated for 6 months. 6 months. For a role that would resurrect his career so completely that the word resurrection would feel inadequate. The hesitation was not confusion about the quality of the material. The script was clearly extraordinary. The hesitation was the particular paralysis of a man who has been told repeatedly, in the language of empty phone lines and diminishing offers, that his judgment cannot be trusted, that his instincts have failed him. When you have watched yourself choose wrong enough times, even obvious right choices begin to look suspicious. He prayed about it. He talked to Kelly. He sat with the discomfort of not knowing. Finally, he said yes. Pulp Fiction was released in October 1994. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It entered the culture not gradually, but all at once, the way certain films do. Not as a movie people saw, but as an event people experienced, and then immediately needed to discuss. Tarantino had made something that rearranged the conversation about what American cinema could be. And at the center of it, moving through the film with the unhurried confidence of a man who has always known exactly how much space he is allowed to occupy, was John Travolta. The dance sequence with Uma Thurman lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. It reminded everyone who had somehow forgotten, and an entire generation who had been too young to know, that this man had a quality on screen that could not be manufactured or replicated or taught. It was simply there. It had always been there. The years of silence had not touched it. His performance earned him his second Academy Award nomination. The phone did not merely start ringing again. It rang differently, with the urgency of people who had convinced themselves they had discovered something new, who did not want to acknowledge that what they were actually doing was recognizing something they had overlooked. Get Shorty followed. Then Broken Arrow. Then Face Off, in which he and Nicolas Cage dismantled each other with a gleeful precision that audiences found irresistible. He commanded $20 million per film. He was on the cover of magazines again, but this time the coverage carried a different tone. The slightly embarrassed enthusiasm of an industry acknowledging it had looked away from something it should have been watching. He had done what almost no one in Hollywood history has managed to do. Not merely survived a fall, but returned from it with his actual abilities intact, waiting to be recognized by someone with eyes clear enough to see them. He was 40 years old. Kelly was pregnant with their daughter, Ella Blue. The house in Florida was full of noise and life, and the particular chaos of a family that is adding to itself. For the first time since Diana's Garden in March 1977, John Travolta allowed himself to believe that the trajectory was moving in a direction he could trust. He would have this belief for a while longer, long enough to mistake it for permanence. Ella Blue Travolta was born in 2000. Benjamin was born in 2010. The house in Ocala, Florida, held 3 children, 2 parents, and the specific kind of fullness that comes when a family has found its shape. From the outside, it looked like a rival, like a man who had survived enough to finally rest inside something stable. Jet was the oldest. Born in 1992, during the quiet years. Before Pulp Fiction had rewritten everything, he had been diagnosed with autism and experienced seizures from an early age. John and Kelly learned the particular discipline of a household built around a child whose needs require constant attention and adaptation. The scheduling, the vigilance, the way you learn to read a room differently when someone you love is vulnerable in ways the world does not always accommodate. They did not speak about it publicly with the language of burden. They spoke about Jet the way parents speak about a child they are simply devoted to. He was theirs. They showed up. January 2nd, 2009. The family was in the Bahamas, on vacation. Jet was 16 years old. He was found unresponsive in the bathroom. He had suffered a seizure and struck his head. By the time help arrived, by the time John reached him and dropped to his knees and began CPR, with the desperate precision of a father who understands that technique is the only thing left available to him, it was already too late. Jet Travolta was gone. There is a specific cruelty in the loss of a child that exists outside the reach of language. Every parent understands this as an abstraction, a fear kept at a careful distance. John Travolta understood it now as fact, as the particular weight of a boy who had been in the world and was no longer, whose absence would reshape every room he had ever occupied. Jet was the most wonderful son that two parents could ever ask for, John and Kelly said in their statement. The sentence is simple. It carries everything. He was 55 years old. He had buried Diana at 23. He had rebuilt. He had lost his career and recovered it. He had built a family with deliberate care. And now, this. In 2010, Kelly gave birth to Benjamin. John described his youngest son as giving the house a renewed spirit. Not replacing what had been lost, because nothing replaces what has been lost, but adding something new to stand alongside the grief. A different kind of light in the same house. They moved forward because moving forward was the only direction available. They raised Ella and Benjamin. They kept Jet's memory present, not as a wound to be managed, but as a person who had existed and mattered and deserved to be remembered with specificity. Then, July 12, 2020. Kelly Preston had been diagnosed with breast cancer 2 years earlier. She had kept it largely private, continuing to move through her life with the same deliberate composure she had always carried. John knew. The children knew. The world, largely, did not. She died at 57. It is with a very heavy heart that I inform you that my beautiful wife, Kelly, has lost her 2-year battle with breast cancer, John wrote. The sentence is careful and final in the way that only public statements about private devastation can be. Diana Hyland had died of breast cancer at 41. Kelly Preston died of breast cancer at 57. The same disease, across 4 decades, had taken both women he had loved most completely. The parallel is the kind of thing that, if it appeared in a screenplay, a script editor would flag as too convenient, too symmetrical, too constructed to feel real. It was real. In the months after Kelly's death, John was alone with his children in the Florida house for the first time. The structure that had held the family together, the daily rhythms, the particular gravity of Kelly's presence at the center of things, was gone. He was 66 years old, raising a 10-year-old and a 20-year-old, navigating grief while trying to ensure that his children's lives retained some continuity beneath the disruption. One evening, Benjamin came to him. "Because Mom died," the boy said, "I'm afraid you're going to die too." John did not reach for comfort immediately. He did not offer the reassurances that are available, but untrue. He sat with his son in the specific discomfort of a question that deserves an honest answer. "Ben," he said, "I could die tomorrow. You could. Anyone can. That's part of life. You just do your best to live as long as you can." It is not a comforting answer. It is the answer of a man who has stood at enough bedsides to know that false comfort is its own form of abandonment. Benjamin was 10 years old, and his father told him the truth about mortality. Not to frighten him, but because the boy had already seen enough of life to deserve to be spoken to plainly. That conversation, more than any film or award or box office figure, reveals who John Travolta has become after everything he has survived. A man who no longer reaches for the performance of reassurance when the real thing is available. A man who has learned, at significant cost, that presence is more valuable than comfort. That showing up honestly is harder than showing up well, and worth considerably more. John Travolta is 70 years old. He wakes up each morning in a house in Ocala, Florida, where the land is flat and wide and the sky arrives without obstruction. There is a runway beside the property. He has always loved flying. The particular clarity of altitude, the way the ground rearranges itself into something comprehensible when seen from above. It is not difficult to understand why a man who has spent his life navigating things at ground level would find comfort in that. Ella is in her 20s now. Benjamin is a teenager. John raises them with the attentiveness of someone who understands, without needing to be reminded, that time is not a renewable resource. He still works. The films are smaller now, productions that arrive and depart without the cultural weight of what came before. The industry has moved in the direction it always moves, toward newer faces carrying stories the culture has not yet told. This is not a tragedy. It is simply the nature of the thing. Fame was never promised to be permanent, and John Travolta has lived long enough to stop confusing what is temporary with what matters. What he has built that endures is quieter than a box office number. The Jet Travolta Foundation works with families navigating autism and seizure disorders. Families in the particular position of loving someone whose needs the world is not always designed to accommodate. John knows that position from the inside. The foundation does not exist as a monument or a legacy project. It exists because he understands what those families are carrying, and understanding is the only honest basis for help. He keeps Diana present. He keeps Jet present. He keeps Kelly present. In the way he speaks about them publicly, in the tributes he posts, in the refusal to let memory become something tidy and resolved. Grief, he seems to understand, is not a problem to be solved. It is a relationship that continues after one person can no longer participate directly. There is a line he has said in various forms across the years, in interviews that took place in very different chapters of his life. Applause fades. Trophies gather dust. But the people you love, and the moments you shared with them, these are the things that remain. He has had more opportunity than most to test that proposition against reality. And reality has confirmed it, repeatedly, at significant personal cost. What John Travolta represents now is not the disco king of 1977, or the resurrection story of 1994, or even the grieving father of 2009. He represents something less cinematic and more durable than any of those things. He represents the specific human capacity to continue, not triumphantly, not without damage, but honestly. To get up on the mornings when getting up requires genuine effort. To raise children in a house that has known loss. To speak truthfully to a 10-year-old boy who is afraid of death, rather than offering him a performance of comfort that would be easier to deliver and less true. He learned in that New Jersey house, from a mother who traded her own stage for a classroom, that the work itself is the point. That showing up is not a lesser version of succeeding. It is the thing that makes everything else possible. He learned from Diana that love does not require a future in order to be complete. That a garden in March can be enough. That saying goodbye properly is its own form of honor. He learned from Jet that presence, uncomplicated, daily, attentive presence, is the only currency that actually matters in a family. He learned from Kelly that building something with another person is an act of courage that deserves to be recognized as such, particularly when both people understand that nothing is guaranteed. He learned from Pulp Fiction that the thing that makes you who you are does not disappear because no one is currently looking for it. It waits. It is patient. It does not require an audience to remain intact. And he learned from Benjamin, from the question of a frightened child who had already lost too much, that honesty, delivered with love, is the highest form of comfort available to us. The man who taught a generation how to dance has learned, across 5 decades and 3 losses, and one of the more improbable careers in Hollywood history, that the dance does not end when the music stops. You keep moving, not because it is easy, not because the grief has resolved itself into something manageable, but because stopping would mean letting go of the people who believed in you before you had given them any particular reason to. His mother told him there was no halfway. He has honored that in ways she could not have anticipated, in circumstances she could not have predicted. Through the white suit at Diana's memorial, through the CPR he performed in a Bahamian bathroom, knowing it was already too late and doing it anyway. Through the honest answer he gave his youngest son on an evening when a lie would have been so much simpler. John Travolta is still here, still moving forward, still choosing each morning to continue. Sometimes that is the whole story. Sometimes that is enough. If his journey has stayed with you, leave a comment below. And wherever you are tonight, keep moving forward.